Bill. They've attacked him and Katherine, even at their present location. They've been hit with these directed energy weapons. Katherine and I first met about 5 years ago in St. Louis, I mean, in New Orleans, Bay St. Louis, actually, nearby. And, I've been fascinated by her work forever. We've done interviews where she had to have a metal sheet over her because she was being bombarded, and you could hear the particles hit the metal sheet. So I don't want to hear about any placebo effects regarding this directed energy stuff, okay? I'm rather distressed about that. Danny was doing an excellent job explaining, giving the documentation. And Rima says, yes, it's a matter of interpretation. Well, I'll tell you, I've been looking at this, Rima, and I think Danny has got it right. In any case, we're here with Dr. Horton, and Katherine has been making an effort with Bill to inform the Secret Service about modes of threat to President Trump, of which the Secret Service is abysmally ignorant. They are no more aware than they are of the particles that are in their own blood. So, Katherine, I'm just overjoyed to have you here. The mic is yours.
Thank you. Before I start, can I do a quick test? Can you guys see and hear me okay? Does that look and sound okay to you guys?
Great. Everything's
okay,
good.
Because all my presentations are always the NSA willing. Last year, I think it was that they took off the entire grid in my entire region, and I was late for the presentation. So if there's any sound distortion, sometimes they introduce hissings, nothing to do with my microphone. We have high-speed internet here, so any sort of disruption will be directly due to the FBI and NSA. It should be utterly flawless, and I hope that they're interested enough to hear what I've got to say that they ensure it's flawless. Can I share my screen on my end? Because I would like, so today's presentation is a complete...
Of course.
Okay, excellent. Today's presentation is a break from the usual stuff I talk about. So those people who have been following me, I specialize on intelligence agency criminality, specifically directed energy weapons, covert non-consensual body implants, and I've talked about those in the previous years. I think last year talked about our attempts to get through to President Trump. I drove down to Mar-a-Lago, and today, because of what's happening in the world and because attacks are increasing, today is almost like a self-defense lecture of if you are a truther, a patriot, if you are doing anything that is mildly, even remotely going up against the deep state, you have to know certain things that they will unleash on you. You might think you're not important enough. You might think this will never happen to you. But I did a survey back in 2017-18 where I collected international affidavits to figure out the targeting program of the intelligence agencies. And I did this compiled on a relatively small statistical sample of, I think I had 50 or 60 affidavits that I published, but those already showed a very clear picture, which is that number one, once you become targeted, it will be targeting for life. It is independent if you're just Joe Blogs off the street or if you are, royalty or president or whatever. When you get on the list, you will stay on the shit list until the end of your life. And they hope that you will die in this program. Those victims who have ear implants and have the so-called voice to skull technology and have the nonstop babble from their abusers, they are told that the only way out of this program is through death. And that is pretty much held up in the data. In my affidavit collection, it didn't matter when the targeting started, it was still continuing. And apart from one exception, which was kind of a dubious, I think, Intel contribution, everybody said that their targeting had not stopped, and it was independent on when the targeting started. Last year, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30, 40, 60 years ago, it didn't matter. It's continuing. And the other thing is also that it's generational. So every second affidavit had concrete proof that either their parents or their children were also being targeted. So this is a generational, lifelong program you get put into. And as part of that program, they will unleash absolutely everything they have, everything in their arsenal. This could be directed energy weapons. You could non-consensually implant without your knowledge and not know it for decades, like happened to me. I was implanted, I think, in the year 2000. That's why I traced it back to. And I only found out in 2017. And I'm not even talking about the nanobots. I'm talking about big clonking microchips that one can measure with a bug detector. So eventually they will unleash everything. And today's talk is dedicated to all those truthers as a kind of, the kind of things you need to think about. It is extremely hard to predict what type of attack will be unleashed on you. It could be anything out of I have a list of different types of targeting that I collected for this affidavit collection. It's the affidavit template has pretty much everything I ever heard about, and it's 90 pages where every line on every page is a different method of attack. So yeah, it could be any of those, but today I want to talk about the rough types of targeting, and they were the most acute, the ones that could have turned deadly very easily had I not managed to get out, mostly by chance. I don't pride myself on being particularly brilliant or particularly knowledgeable about these things. Every single time it's just down to luck more than anything. And I just hope that with my presentation, if you already have heard about it before, if you're in that situation, you're not wasting precious seconds thinking, oh shit, is this really real? Because every single time I survived an assassination attempt, and by now it's been so many, I have to sit down with pen and paper to remember them all. Every single time, up until pretty much the last minute when I decided to act, I couldn't believe that it was really happening. It sounds silly to say because I had so many, but every single time I kept thinking, am I just being paranoid? And the answer is, if you feel unsafe, your subconscious has already done sophisticated pattern recognition and analysis and tells you, is screaming at you, you are not safe, you need to act. So lesson number one to all those truthers out there is expect to be targeted. Expect it. Expect that you will be eventually targeted with directed energy weapons, with attacks on the street, with a plethora of other stuff that I don't have time to go into. And if something strange happens, do not assume you're paranoid. If you're a truther, assume with 100% certainty that people are out to get you, because people are out to get you. And most likely they want you dead. All right. So this is the whole premise. And this could be anything. So typically law enforcement are spies, military personnel, secret service. These people would be taught escape maneuvers and whatnot. I have none such skills. Okay. I have to make shit up on the fly, on the go to escape with my life. And today I just want to present you the harshest things, and there were even more that don't fit into this. But if you see something like that unfold around you, act as quick as you can and try to just get out of that situation. Right?
Katherine, you can screen share from your computer. You just have to do it yourself. Go down to the green share. And as you were talking,
Excellent.
I was thinking of the old joke, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't out to get you.
That is correct, right? And these days, the attacks on just normal investigators, private researchers, private people who are just doing something, not even necessarily for court cases like I did, but just out there for themselves, they too are being targeted. And the reason why they're being targeted is because behind the scenes, there's a vast targeting industry being is proliferating and being built up with the still ongoing, black budget that's still being funded from drugs, whatever Pete Texas might claim after shooting a couple of speedboats. So the drug income, the money is still being laundered into the black budget of the military. NATO is being funded into stupidity, and NATO is behind a lot of this targeting internationally. So the money for it does not stop. It has actually increased. So many, many more people from every walks of life become targeted. So by now, I would say, if you are something like a judge of integrity, you will be targeted 100%. If you are somewhere in a major, I just seen Dr. Rima Leibov said her husband was assassinated. Yes, I that's what I thought. I heard about his death, and I agree with Dr. Leibov. Actually relieved she said that. I'm not being paranoid. But yes, the problem is sometimes it's very hard to prove, but when you still have your life and you can do something about it, that's what you have to do. So I will dive straight into it. The examples that I will choose are those from my own life. I know about many more modes of attack, and this whole talk is just to get you to be motivated to think along those lines of what would you do in that situation. It's not necessarily the perfect instructions. In fact, now that I tell you how I escaped, and be sure that the intel agencies will come up with something where that mode of avenue will not be open to you, maybe. So you have to do something clever. But if between now and then you, I don't know, in the shower have some time to think about it and think, what would I do? You might come up with something better in that situation. So diving straight in, my very first assassination attempt, and I have to say, I'm so sorry, I sound like a boomer, but I don't know how to make PDFs full screen anymore since the update. So I have to just go page by page. I apologize. So here we go. Now, so how not to die trying, trying to do whatever you want to do, shut down the deep state is the goal. My very first assassination attempt, overt one, I should say. Afterwards, I realized that stuff that happened to me were attempts previously, but the one that was quite official from British intelligence happened on the 22nd of May, 2016. I got shot in the head with not just directed energy weapons, but so-called pulsed energy projectiles, and I'll show you what that looks like. But I want to tell you a bit about the backstory. So by this time, 2016, I had been kind of semi-overtly targeted for, I think, over a decade, about 12 years. And then my targeting became overt harassment, overt housebreaking, starting in November 2011. That went on, followed me to Germany, followed me to Switzerland, and eventually in January, 10th of January 2016, I started to be attacked with microwave weapons, the old classical microwaves, you can feel the burning on your skin type of weapons. I was trying to collect as much evidence as I could, and by May 2016, I was ready to take, or so I thought, British intelligence to court for an injunction. I didn't even want damages. Now, what happened is that on the 19th of May 2016, I traveled from Zurich to London to the High Court to attend the very first hearing of my court case, which was Dr. Horton versus SIS's MI6. Okay, this is British Foreign Intelligence, British Domestic Intelligence, and GCHQ. Now, when I landed the night before in London, I had to take the so-called Easy Bus. So EasyJet is a European air company, and they had an Easy Bus service from, I think it was London Luton, going into downtown London to my hotel. I climbed onto the Easy Bus. I was fairly empty, and a guy sat down next to me and started talking to me. And eventually, out of the blue, we were talking about small talk, the weather, all this stuff. Suddenly, he turned to me and he said, "Katherine, there's crime in all the countries, but in some countries, it's just very well hidden." And I just looked at him and I'm like, well, yeah, that's a true statement. And then he looked at me all serious and he said, "Did they kill Diana?" And I didn't even know anything about beyond that Diana died. I had no idea about conspiracy theory. Since then, I learned that, well, the official conspiracy theory is that British intelligence killed Diana. So, right. And I was litigating British intelligence the next day. So I already thought, oh, okay, that's a message to me. Now, thankfully, nothing more happened to me that day. Nothing happened to me during the hearing, apart from usual stalking and all this weirdness. But 3 days afterwards, I was back in Switzerland, and my husband and I had come back from a walk or a little hike or whatever, and we were driving back to Zurich on the Swiss highway. Now, if you remember, Diana died in a tunnel under the Seine, the River Seine in Paris. So I think she collided with the 13th support pillar, her car, according to David Icke. Doesn't matter. She died in a car crash in a tunnel. We were driving on the highway in Switzerland, and as we drove into a tunnel, suddenly I had this, it really felt like being hit on the forehead with a hammer. So you have these impact sensations And they were so strong. I could feel it was not just an impact on my forehead by some invisible something. It seemed to go into my brain because I had this kind of like electrical flash sensation and a sensation of like extreme dizziness, where with every blow I thought, oh, wow, with the next one, I'm going to pass out. Now, fortunately, by that time, I'd already researched energy weapons a little bit. And I thought, oh, it's one of these directed energy weapons, and it must come from the car in front of me because we're in this big old tunnel. It's not drones or something else. So I said to my husband, I have to get out of the beamline, floored the accelerator, and just took off next to the car. And I think what saved me that day is that instinctively, my first instinct was to, oh, I need to slow down. If you slow down and you drive 110 kilometers per hour, with the next shot, you will be unconscious or dead and smash into the sidewall at 70 miles per hour. So you will be pretty dead. So what saved me at that time is that in a split second, I decided to accelerate towards the danger actually and overtake it. As soon as I was past the car, I felt perfectly fine. I got out of the tunnel. I was shaking like crazy, but I managed to get through. So this is just a footnote that if you are in this situation, you suddenly feel dizziness or any such things as you are driving your car, it could be a directed energy weapon. This can come in the form of beams. Most people can't see, but there used to be a dark disc branded on my forehead for a very long time until it started fading. That was a continuous directed microwave beam, actually. But it could be microwave beams. It could be these very fancy novel waveforms, pulsed energy projectiles. It could be anything, but what you can do is, if you have the time or if you're not quite sure, you can just lift your hand, and if it's a pulsed energy projectile, you should feel pain flashes or burning on the back of your hand. So quickly use it as shielding, and to check if you can feel anything immediately, you have to get out of the beamline. Now, if you're not in a tunnel and you have the way, any way to pull to one side and decelerate as quickly as possible, that is, of course, the safest thing. Here, it was no option. If I slow down, one more hit to the head and I'm gone. So you have to be aware that this might be unleashed on you. As crazy as it sounds, directed energy weapons are not very well known because they're being kept out of the media. They are talking about Havana syndrome, making it sound like a medical complaint, like a syndrome of something. No, those are directed energy weapons. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is the fastest growing segment of the weapons industry, as far as I know, because you can commit the perfect murder with them. You can perfectly shoot through car windshields. In fact, I think you can also shoot through the windshield of the Beast and shoot anybody inside, the driver, President Trump, you know. So they are incredibly dangerous weapons, and they are now being unleashed on many people. So if you are a truther, this might be unleashed on you because you just, you know, put out some posts that people didn't like. All right. So number one, directed energy weapons, be very aware. Now, quickly, I want to share my screen and show you what it looks like when you are being attacked with a directed energy weapon, just so that you have a visual image. To my knowledge, sorry, this is my court case on my website. So the way you can find this evidence is if you go to stop007.org and you scroll down to the evidence here. That's the puzzle pieces that we need to put together. And here under evidence, you can find a link to a YouTube video here, and it's at the 8-minute mark. This video here that opens at the 8-minute mark. And oh, hang on a second. I don't think I have shared with sound. Let me do this again. So share sound, and it's this one here. So this was recorded in Zurich. I'll try to make it as loud as possible. I'm not sure if you heard this. You can play it back yourself and turn up the sound. This is me trying to sleep in a shielded area on the floor of my office in Switzerland, some 7 years ago. And I was shot in the face by a pulsed energy projectile that went not just through a brick wall of my home, but also through several layers of metal foil shielding. So this is not a normal electromagnetic wave. Also, because of the brick wall, I don't believe this is a particle beam because of certain properties it has in electromagnetic detectors and how the beam doesn't really spread. If it were an electron beam or even a proton beam, I don't expect it to be quite so collimated if there's a mini accelerator on the other side. So anyway, I don't want to get into the details. There's reason to believe that this is really novel electromagnetic waveforms. And the point is that it not just moved the alufoil, it actually, you can hear the impact sound. And I think this is being played a few more times.
Did I get too ahead?
So you could hear that impact. And here's the general description of how many layers it went through. Now, these weapons are incredible. In Bill's home in Maryland, next to NSA, a pulsed energy projectile or several pulsed energy projectiles were used to punch holes into sheet metal, the sheet metal back of a whiteboard that we'd placed down on the floor, on the ground floor, and we had moved our bedroom into the basement because I was being attacked so violently. And in this shot, the US military, their drone shot through the roof, the upper floor, didn't damage the roof, there was no corresponding hole, and punched 2 holes through sheet metal and made 2 horrific impact sounds. I personally think that they were trying to kill me on the floor below or just demonstrate what they could do. But if you hear any sort of unusual impact sounds that don't sound like the normal cracking of beams around you, those could be pulsed energy projectiles. And these drones carrying these weapons are flying absolutely everywhere in all the US states, all across the NATO countries, and they are terrorizing people. I know that for a fact because typically they shoot me. If I'm there, I'm pretty guaranteed to be shot sooner or later. All right, so be aware that these weapons are now absolutely everywhere. And unless you're specifically told that this stuff exists, you would never believe it. Okay, another thing I should say is that if I went back to my old alma mater, the University of Oxford, and talked to my old physics colleagues, they would tell me that this stuff doesn't exist because the Maxwell's equations do not allow for a longitudinal momentum of a photon. A photon has electric and magnetic field lines at right angles to each other and to the direction of travel. So a photon traveling through space cannot have an impact this way because there are no field lines along the longitudinal momentum. Okay, this is assuming the Maxwell's equations don't have any, other terms in it, maybe, that we have neglected. And it's also ignoring the fact that from Maxwell's equations and simple classical sinusoidal waves, which is typically the solution that you come up with at school and at university, we know that there are other waveforms because between Maxwell's equations and quantum electrodynamics, the whole thing goes highly nonlinear. So there is stuff missing from the way that it's even taught at elite universities. Okay, now the professors tend to forget that. I couldn't forget it because I kept being shot in the face with it repeatedly. So there's some classified novel waveforms. If I had to make any random guess, I would say it's the physics that Tesla uncovered or discovered, and it's from his papers that were stolen after his death in a New York hotel room. So when he died, the FBI went in, stole his papers, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, those papers were given to John Trump, which is or was the uncle of our President Donald J. Trump, if I'm not mistaken. Sometimes our president talks about his uncle who was thought to be a genius, right? And I'm sure he was. Now his young nephew, because it was probably Donald Trump didn't have any interest. So we cannot assume that our president knows about it. He might do, and maybe his uncle's papers contain any sort of private papers contain any information on that. Oops, I just got a message that my internet connection is unstable. If there's any lag, you can be sure it's the NSA that doesn't like me that I talk about this stuff. So anyway, so if you are a physicist and you're wondering how the F can this even be, I think we have to think along those lines of novel solutions to Maxwell's equations, think in terms of quantum electrodynamics and what's in between, in all sorts of waveforms and energy waves. Are there any curl operators that we can put into any sort of solution of Maxwell's equations, and so on and so on? Now, people told me about one German physicist who was, of course, ostracized from academic life in Germany, who was talking about novel solutions to Maxwell's equations and extensions to Maxwell's equations. And I think he was ostracized because he was describing the underlying physics of this weapons technology. And because it's so powerful, our militaries and our intelligence agencies want to keep it hidden from us so they can use it to kill us and kill our presidents, the ones that we elect and not the ones that they select. So for this reason, oh yeah, somebody says it's Dr. Konstantin Meil in Germany. Could be, that name rings a bell. So it could be Konstantin Meil. I think there's also another name, but yes, that's a point of research. So Meyl, Meil, Dr. Meil's work. Anyway, by the time I started to be shot in the face with this, I never had time to do any physics experiments to figure out what it is, okay? But there are some experiments related to it online that you can find that might already indicate that there's more than just classical waves as we've been taught. Anyway, so this is directed energy weapons. Now, let's get back to something more, slightly more tame. I think the next thing that I want to talk about is stuff that everybody can understand. Hang on, is it this one I want to share? Let me share the right PDF. Let me just close this. Sorry, guys. Here we go. So this was the first ever overt assassination attempt, and the solution was to head at the source of danger instead of try to get away from it. Oh, I should also say that the day after this happened, I was on the top floor of a house. That was my apartment in Zurich, and there was a 3-story building opposite, and the top neighbor had this rooftop terrace that was attached to her apartment. And the day after the assassination attempt, it just so happened that this neighbor, whose big roof terrace was looking straight onto my balcony, put out a big black goat. And then the big black goat eventually also acquired something that looked like a flat antenna aimed right at me. And there was other stuff, electromagnetic stuff, suddenly hitting my flat. So anyway, the big black goat is a satanic symbol. I just noted it that it was a bit too much coincidence that it happened literally the day after I almost died. Suddenly there's this black goat, and I kept staring at this black goat for the rest of my time I was living in Zurich in that place. Anyway, so the second one is this is not the second assassination attempt, but this is the second one I'm going to present to you. It is anything to do with car sabotage. Now, Nigel Farage, the guy who is leading the Reform Party in the UK and is trying to, fight all this corruption in the UK, from what I remember, he survived a plane crash with a little Cessna where they were dragging an advert, in the back, and something happened and the plane crashed. He survived that. And also driving back from one of these EU buildings, I think it was Strasbourg, on the motorway, his wheels came off. All right, so loosening the screws or the bolts around the wheels is a favorite. It's like an intelligence agency staple, okay? So it might be worth your time buying that tool where you can just check it that it's set to the right torque setting and all the bolts are in place, just because they do it to quite a few people. Now, the sabotage that I experienced when I drove to Mar-a-Lago on December 8th last year, I was trying to hand in evidence to the Secret Service. Eventually, I had written them a letter a week earlier saying I will go not into Mar-a-Lago, no, good God, no. I will go up to the checkpoint to hand over evidence. And it was actually a test if the FBI is stealing our letter or not, because I said previously we'd written in September, neither President Trump nor the Secret Service reacted to those letters. And Bill is the retired technical director who designed the architecture that NSA is using to this day. So it was a bit odd. So I said to Bill, I'm going to send a letter And then I'm going to announce that a week later, I will be going to the checkpoint. There's a police checkpoint before, and I'll try to hand over evidence outside to the Secret Service pertaining to the Butler assassination attempt and threats against the president's life. For example, these Palestinian projectiles and stuff like that, right? So I sent a letter, and the next week later, I was driving down to Mar-a-Lago. It was quite a drive. And the very first thing that happened, I think it was 2.5 hours into this car drive, which was long indeed, right? Suddenly, and fortunately, it happened not when I was on the highway. I think if it had happened at full blast when you're driving 70 miles per hour, this in itself can be deadly. But what happened is that the plastic underside, the splash cover, whatever you want to call it, under the car, detached, but the front detached. So as you're driving and the flap goes down, it can, in principle, fold under, create asymmetric, horrendous friction, and take you either into the oncoming traffic or into somebody else. So it's bad indeed. Fortunately, this thing detached as I was pulling into a what's it called, like one of these stops along the highway, because I had drank a lot of coffee and I needed the bathroom. Thank goodness for my coffee addiction. So as I was pulling in, they had a little speed bump, and as I drove over the speed bump to slow people down and not to race into that stop, after I was fine for some time, and suddenly this horrific sound started, and it turned out to be the plastic underside scraping along the bottom of the along the tarmac on the bottom of the car. Now, I had no idea what that was, but it was just so typical that I'm setting off on this by myself. I didn't dare to bring Bill along because then they are sure to kill us both. So I was, and suddenly I'm in this car and there's this horrific sound. So I got out and I had a look what it was, and I realized the underside had detached. Now, mind you, I'm not prepared for this. I had tools in the car, but nothing that I could fix this with. And eventually I had the idea that the only thing I could use to somehow tie this back up. So I managed to, the plastic underside had folded in on itself. I had to yank it back out, right? And try to get it. Fortunately, it was very flexible. And then I thought, how the hell am I going to make it stick back up? And I discovered that they had cut. So there's a plastic pin that holds it in place, and they had cut the plastic so that at the smallest, like slightly larger vibration, this thing would pop out. But there was no way to fix it back there because they had sabotaged the edge. They had cut and frayed the edge. So the only thing I could come up with was the only thing I had on me was a phone's data transfer cable. So I cut off the two ends, and then I used the data transfer cable here to hold this thing back up. Okay, so you can see this. I fed it through here, through there. Fortunately, there were these holes, and it actually held it up. In this area here, if I zoom in, you can see how they have somehow broken off, probably with a box cutter, cut the edge of this and then cut it down so that it was just barely holding. So this thing was on this plastic pin here, and it was just barely holding itself back in place. Now this thing is kind of bowing down a little bit, which is why this hole is not aligned with that thing anymore. But even if it were, it would not hold it in place any longer. So that is the sort of crazy shit that the intelligence agencies will do. And afterwards, if I had crashed and died that day, they would have said, okay, well, this thing was damaged, it popped out, and then the car, had friction, and she just veered into oncoming traffic. Very sad, right? So that's another thing that they can do. And again, they might do this particular thing to you, in which case I recommend having a data transfer cable, or they might come up with something else entirely. I have heard the craziest stuff. To give you an idea about the sort of things that I've experienced, back in Germany, I had inherited my grandfather's car, which was a 2003 Toyota Corolla. It was great, but it did not have cruise control. And yet, when I was visiting, I was working with a charity in Belgium, and I was traveling from Switzerland by car to Belgium to do chip measurements on victims to find their body implants. Now, as I was driving, And this is after about 8 or 9 hours of driving. So you're pretty tired already. I have to make it there the same day. And suddenly I realized that if I take my foot off the gas and the speed starts dropping on the highway, the car will take over and accelerate itself up to 130 kilometers per hour, which was the speed limit in Germany. So, suddenly my car had cruise control. I talked to a couple of car mechanics and they said it's actually not that easy to put it in a car that doesn't have it. So, they are doing something sophisticated. It could be that overnight they changed the whole, the inside of the car, or maybe it's a different car. It looked like my old car with the usual scratches inside and so on. But they will go to all sorts of lengths. And it's always two things. Number one, they have money, more money than sense. Okay. The drug trade pays so much for this bullshit. But number two, the reason why they might do really advanced crazy shit, even if you're just a single mom and have never done any anything, it's because they are training up generations and generations of other terror stalkers and other, little assassins all around us. So you might be shredded just as a training exercise. Keep that in mind. So you don't have to be somebody, you don't have to be important, you don't have to, fight corruption or the government. They might just do it to train some little moron, okay, in how to do that particular method of sabotage. So, going back to the types of car sabotage, the other thing was about this cruise control that my car suddenly acquired on the way to Brussels, is that it would accelerate to 130. But when I drove back to Switzerland, the Swiss top speed limit is only 110. It's not 130. About half an hour before the border, right? The cruise control kicked in again, and the car kept accelerating itself up to 130. After the Swiss border crossing, it accelerated itself up to 110. So, suddenly my car developed all these advanced things. It doesn't make any sense in terms of any normal way of analysis would not take into account the volume of money, their training needs, that they need people to train stuff on. But the truth is, this sort of really advanced stuff, I've also heard from other people, literally just single moms being targeted. And they not even complained at parents' board meetings against the trans agenda, nothing, right? They were just single moms. So all this shit can happen to any one of you, any one of your spouses, your daughters, your okay, now the other stuff. Oh, one more thing. When I drove to the airport a while back, I hired one of these. So I hired a car, and you always get given the newest ones because these cars get shredded quite quickly. Now, the hire car that I got, when I was trying to change the lane to overtake somebody, the car took over and pulled me right back. Now, of course, because of who I am, my very first assumption was, oh, here we go again. That's the FBI, right? Now, this time it wasn't. I just looked down on the dashboard and I realized that there was a little flag that I hadn't spotted, which was, I think it was lane assist. So the car thought I was, falling asleep and just pulling off because I was not, overtaking harshly enough, and it pulled me gently back. Now, the thing about lane assist is that it can be done benevolently, right? But lane assist can also take over your car and very lovingly steer you into oncoming traffic. So be aware with all these modern cars that they come with a lot of gimmicks. It doesn't even have to be one of these Tesla machines who are truly just, roving crematoria, right? If something happens to a Tesla, you can't open the doors because they are electronic. You can't, you might not be able to call for help if your phone just happens to be empty, and they will empty your phone battery too if they want to kill you. So you will not have noticed that while your phone is next to you, it would heat up, it